All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the timeless, let's face it, often amoral game of power that dictates human hierarchies. I mean, whether we like to admit it or not, power dynamics, they're everywhere. They're just hiding in plain sight. So let's bring them to the surface.
We're going to neutrally dissect Robert Greene's incredibly dense Machiavellian synthesis of history. By looking at this, admittedly highly debated source material, our goal is to understand the cunning and sometimes downright ruthless strategies that history's most formidable figures used to climb to the top and, more importantly, stay there. Remember, we're just looking at the mechanics of the playbook here. The absolute crucial point to keep in mind is that whether you're navigating a medieval royal court or a modern-day corporate boardroom, the underlying human weaknesses, the insecurities, the dynamics, they remain exactly the same. The costumes might change, but the script, it's ancient. To make things super efficient, we've synthesized all 48 laws into 6 overarching thematic pillars. This gives us a structured masterclass playbook for both defensive and offensive maneuvers. So, we'll be covering the game of power, mastering your public image, strategic trust and deception, the art of leverage, executing calculated bold action, and finally, ultimate power is adaptability. All right, let's kick things off with Pillar 1, the game of power, and understanding the board. This first law brilliantly illustrates the sheer danger of ego. Just look at the historical example of French Finance Minister Fouquet. He wanted to solidify his position, right? So he threw this lavish, spectacularly expensive party just to show off his cultivated manners and his connections to his boss, King Louis XIV. But instead of making himself seem indispensable, Fouquet unintentionally made the king feel deeply insecure. Basically, the master felt upstaged. And as a direct result, Fouquet quickly found himself removed from the board entirely. So, what's the takeaway here? Well, if you're smarter than your boss, you better act like you aren't. Discreet flattery wins the day. Moving right along to Pillar 2, mastering your public image, where perception is absolutely reality. Now, what's really fascinating here is how historical masters didn't just sit back and let people form opinions of them organically. No way. They actively molded their public characters. Take Mata Hari, for example. She wasn't actually from the East, she was from Holland, but she completely manufactured this irresistible aura of exotic mystery to captivate high society. Julius Caesar, he used massive theatrical gladiator spectacles just to appear larger than life to the masses. And P.T. Barnum used pure sensational media gimmicks, knowing full well that even bad publicity brought him power. They didn't just live their lives, they performed them. Because a solid reputation literally does the heavy lifting for you. It exaggerates your strengths without you having to spend a single drop of extra energy. Think about China's War of the Three Kingdoms. General Liang was vastly outnumbered by his rival Sima Yi. But Liang had a pristine track record. He had never been defeated. So what exactly did he do? He sat alone, completely unguarded, on top of the city wall, wearing a Taoist robe and playing the lute. That's it. His reputation was so fiercely intimidating that Sima Yi thought, okay, this has got to be a deadly trap, and ordered his entire massive army to retreat. The battle was won entirely by reputation alone.
Next up is Pillar 3, strategic trust and deception, or the art of misdirection.
Let's look at a really striking comparison. The source text sharply contrasts the Byzantine Emperor Michael III with the Chinese Emperor Song. See, Michael III elevated a peasant friend named Basilius, showering him with incredible wealth and privilege. And in return, Basilius grew greedy and actually murdered Michael. The thing is, friends often hide their true feelings to avoid conflict, and that can really mask their envy. On the flip side, Emperor Sung brilliantly spared his enemies, literally the men who had conspired against him. Because they expected the executioner and got generosity instead, they were completely transformed into fiercely loyal allies. A spared enemy has something to prove, whereas a hired friend just kind of gets comfortable. A perfect example of misdirection through selective honesty comes from the infamous con artist Count Victor Lustig. Get this, he actually convinced the deeply paranoid, ruthless mob boss Al Capone to hand over $50,000 for an investment. Then, 60 days later, Lustig returned the money fully intact, apologizing that the investment had failed. Capone was fully expecting either double his money or absolutely nothing. That single highly calculated act of unexpected honesty completely disarmed the gangster. It worked so well that Capone actually gave him a $5,000 reward. Lustig literally used honesty as a smokescreen. So think about this question for a second. In a world where pretty much anyone can be replaced, how exactly do the most powerful historical figures ensure their own survival? Well, that brings us to Pillar 4, the art of leverage and controlling the options. The secret sauce here is making yourself intensely irreplaceable. Michelangelo was an absolute master of this. When he got into a massive quarrel with Pope Julius II over the building of a marble tomb, Michelangelo didn't back down, he just walked away and left Rome. Now, most people would be absolutely terrified of angering the Pope, but the Pope actually had to hunt him down and beg him to return. Why? Because Michelangelo knew he could easily find another wealthy patron, but the Pope knew he could never find another Michelangelo. Let's look at another way you can control the options so that people willingly play the exact cards you deal them. Back in the 17th century, the courtesan Ninon de L'Enclos wanted wealth, but she absolutely refused to give up her independence in a heavily male-dominated society. So she just altered the playing field. She gave her suitors 3 very distinct options. You could be a payeur, who funds her lifestyle, a martyr who waits on her for nothing, or the favorite, a chosen temporary lover. By forcing these men to choose from those specific, predefined paths, she maintained immense wealth and total personal freedom. She gave them the illusion of choice, but every single option served her goals perfectly. All right, shifting gears to Pillar 5, executing calculated bold action and striking with purpose. Ivan the Terrible's rise to power is the ultimate proof that bold action isn't always immediate. In fact, it rarely is. As a young boy, Ivan actually watched his mother get poisoned, and then he endured years of brutal humiliation from rival boyars like the Shuisky family. He didn't show an ounce of ambition, he just laid low. He endured this for 5 incredibly long years, quietly biding his time until he had fully won over the palace guards. And then, at just 13 years old, in one swift, totally unexpected move, he ordered those guards to execute Prince Andrei Shuisky. That single burst of terrifying audacity secured his power for decades. He planned it all the way to the very end. Now contrast Ivan's sudden strike with this concept. Sometimes the absolute boldest action you can take is just staying back and letting your opponent destroy themselves. Napoleon's former foreign minister, Talleyrand, wanted Napoleon permanently out of the picture. So when Napoleon was exiled to the nearby island of Elba, Talleyrand basically let him easily escape. He knew that Napoleon's massive ego just wouldn't let him stay away from France. And exactly as Talleyrand predicted, Napoleon marched right back, took power, but ended up bankrupting the country. This led him straight to the Battle of Waterloo and a much harsher permanent exile on St. Helena. Talleyrand simply laid out the bait and watched it happen. Finally, we arrive at Pillar 6. Ultimate power is adaptability, becoming the formless master. So after absorbing all of these incredibly rigid laws, deceptive tactics, and historical maneuvers, the ultimate lesson of the source material is actually surprisingly paradoxical. It asks you to accept that no law is permanently fixed. To build a rigid fortress around yourself is, eventually, just building your own prison. Knowing that the most powerful move of all is to remain entirely unpredictable, to never let your enemies map out your routines, we're going to leave you with this final thought. Ask yourself, as you navigate your own life, your career, and your daily interactions, are your strategies rigid, predictable, and heavily defended like a fortress? Or are they formless, adaptable, and completely unstoppable, like water?